Good evening, everyone. Over the last several days, I did something most Americans probably would avoid unless they absolutely had to. I watched congressional hearings. Not highlights, not social media clips, not 30-second sound bits edited to fit somebody's political narrative. I watched hours and hours of testimonies from Secretary of State Marco Rubio and testimonies involving members of the administration before multiple congressional committees on Capitol Hill. And when it was over, I found myself asking one simple question. What happened to the Democratic Party? Now, before some people immediately race to social media and accuse me of joining a political movement, let me be very clear. When I joined Englebrook Independent News and later became a partner in this organization, I was proud to work for a news organization that emphasized facts, evidence, and independent thinking. I don't wake up every morning asking Republicans what to believe. I don't wake up every morning asking Democrats what to believe. I listen, I observe, and I evaluate. Then I form my own conclusion. As someone with a college education, a master's degree, and a lifelong habit of weighing both sides of the argument, I try very hard to remain intellectually honest. Which is exactly why what I witnessed in those hearings was so shocking, because what I saw was not oversight. What I saw was not debate. What I saw was not honest attempt to gather information on behalf of American people. What I witnessed looked more like a political performance. At one point during the hearing, Secretary Marco Rubio reportedly asked a question that many Americans watching at home were probably asking themselves. Is this a committee hearing or a circus? And honestly, circus may have been the polite description. Now, congressional hearings are supposed to serve as a purpose. Members ask questions, witnesses provide answers, facts are exchanged, Americans learn something. At least, that's the theory. But what I watched often felt less like a search for truth and more like an audition for a cable news appearance. Questions after questions seemed designed not to gather information but to create viral moments. Members would ask questions and then appear completely uninterested in hearing the answer. Imagine inviting someone to dinner, asking them how their day was, and then yelling over them for the next 3 minutes. That was the energy. It was remarkable. In fact, there was moments when I found myself wondering whether anyone involved actually wanted to answer, because answers have a funny way of disrupting narratives, and narratives are apparently more vulnerable than facts these days. Then came the interruptions, the constant interruptions, the endless interruptions, the kind of interruptions that would get fifth graders sent to the principal's office. Now, I have Democratic friends, a lot of them. Some of them disagree with me on almost every major political issue imaginable, and that's perfectly fine. That's called democracy. But I can honestly say none of my Democratic friends have ever spent an entire conversation repeatedly telling someone to be quiet instead of allowing them to answer the question. Yet, during portions of these hearings, that seemed to become the preferred method of debate. Ask a question, interrupt the answer, complain about an answer, interrupt again, then claim the witness isn't answering the question. It's a strategy that would be hilarious if it weren't happening inside the United States Congress. And here's what struck me the most: the anger. Not disagreement, not passion, not conviction, anger. The kind of anger that appears to consume every discussion involving President Donald Trump, his administration, or anyone associated with it. Whether you support President Trump or oppose him, one reality has become impossible to ignore. For a segment of the political establishment, everything has become about Trump. Everything. The economy? Trump. Foreign policy? Trump. Immigration? Trump. National security? Trump. The weather forecast? Given them enough time and somehow they'll connect to Trump too. At some point, a political movement has to be about more than opposition. At some point, voters want to know what you're for, not just what you're against. And that is where I believe Democratic Party finds itself in serious trouble. Because from the outside looking in, many Americans see the party that appears increasingly disconnected from the concerns of ordinary people. Americans are worried about affordability. They're worried about housing costs. They're worried about public safety. They're worried about national debt, illegal immigration, or worried about the future their children will inherit. Yet, when they tune into congressional hearings, they often see elected officials behaving as though they were engaged in an endless return of the 2016 election. The country has moved on, the world has changed, but parts of Washington seems trapped in a permanent state of political grievance. And that is not leadership, that's obsession. Again, I'm not saying Republicans are perfect. They're not. Not even close. There are Republican policies I disagree with. There are Republican politicians I disagree with. There are Republican decisions that deserve scrutiny and criticism. Absolutely. But criticism loses credibility when it becomes the only thing you offer. And that's the problem. Many Americans don't see a positive vision. They see resistance. They see outrage, they see performative indignation, and they see politicians competing to deliver the most dramatic sound bits rather than the most effective solutions. And frankly, after watching these hearings, I found myself feeling embarrassed, not as a Republican, because I'm not one, not as a Democrat, because I'm not one, but as an American, because these hearings are broadcasted worldwide. Foreign governments watch them, our allies watch them, our adversaries watch them, and what message are we sending? That we can't complete a hearing without turning it into a shouting match? That basic decorum is not considered optional? Political theater matters more than governance? That's not strength. That's dysfunction. And here's the true frustrating part. Americans deserve better. Republicans deserve better. Democrats deserve better. Independent voters deserve better. Every taxpayer funding these institutions deserve better. Congress is supposed to be one of the most important deliberative bodies in the world. Instead, too often it resembles a reality television reunion special. You know the format. Everyone talks, nobody listens, everybody's angry, nothing gets resolved. Then everyone declares victory and goes home. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans are left wondering why Washington cannot seem to solve problems. Well, perhaps because solving problems requires listening. It requires courtesy. It requires humility. It requires accepting that one side might occasionally have a valid point. And increasingly, these qualities seem to be short supply. So once again, I ask the question, what happened to the Democratic Party? What happened to the party that once spoke about working class Americans? What happened to the party that prided itself on debate and discussion? What happened to the party that claimed to value tolerance? Because what I witnessed during these hearings was not confidence. Confidence people don't seem to shout down opposing viewpoints. Confidence people don't fear answers. Confident people don't need consistent outrage to sustain the argument. Confidence allows people to engage, to debate, to persuade, to win on the merit. And unfortunately, what I saw looked less like a confidence and more like desperation. Now, reasonable people can disagree with my analysis. That's perfectly fine. That's healthy. That's democracy. But after spending days watching those hearings from the beginning to the end, I arrived at the conclusion I never expected to reach. The Democratic Party appears increasingly disconnected from the political reality that much of the country is living. And until that changes, the party may continue struggling to understand why so many voters feel unheard, ignored, or alienated. The American people are looking for solutions. They're looking for seriousness. They're looking for leadership. And based on what I witnessed, many of those are still searching. As for the future, well, there will be plenty of more stories to cover, plenty of more hearings, plenty of more political drama. And speaking of political drama, we also have the ongoing Graham Plattner saga unfolding in Maine. But that's a story for another day. For Englebrook Independent News, I'm Haylee Ficuciello. Thank you for watching and please don't forget to subscribe. Good night.